All right. Thank you, Greg. Thank you for hosting us. We really appreciate it. We have been here before. Thank you so much. Zion's a wonderful host. Please feel free to find a seat. We have extra chairs if we need them. And this is very informal. So please feel free to get up, get a drink, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. This is very informal. So I'm John Messer. I'm the executive of the Great Lakes Regional Synod. And this is an introduction to systems thinking. And we're going to apply it to the church. How many of you have done some systems thinking stuff in the past? Have you done Bowen systems? Okay, all right. This is not Bowen. So just so you know, this is not Bowen. No, this is not that. It has crossover, but you'll see that this is not Bowen systems. It's related, but it's not quite the same thing. So just want to set your expectations appropriately there. So what we're going to do today is look at basically an introduction to systems thinking, which is helpful in every sphere of our lives. And then we are going to zero in on how does that apply to our church, specifically how does that apply to the leadership of a church. And so what we're going to do is have a presentation on systems thinking to give you kind of a baseline. And then after lunch, we'll finish up with that presentation, and then we're going to apply it. So then you're going to start thinking systems for your church. So if you aren't already, if you have an issue, if there's something that you've been dealing with in your church, what I want you to do is try to think about it today. I want you to look at it from a systems perspective today, and I'm going to lead you through that after we're done with the presentation, okay? That's really what the purpose of the day is to help you think about that issue you've been dealing with. For example, maybe you have declining attendance. We're going to talk about that. There are lots of ways to deal with that. Some are good, some are bad. But what does that mean systems-wise? What about when what we intend to do isn't what's happening? What about when our outcomes are not matching what we have planned? When the vision is this way, but the outcomes are that way, what do we do? Well, that's a systems issue. So, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. This is very informal. I will address any questions you've got as we go. But I will push a little bit to get us through the presentation so we can get to the praxis part of the day. All right? Okay, you ready? Ready. Okay, here we go. I love these three. They're kind of a summary of why we're here. If you want to understand it, try to change it. Anybody dealt with that? Oh, yeah. If you want to understand what's really going on, try to change something. If the outcomes don't match the intentions, it's a systems problem. And here's the key. If I could give you one truth that you could take home with you, it's this. A system is perfectly designed to get the outcomes that you're seeing. It is. We'll talk a lot more about that. And that's why if you've got outcomes that you're not intending, it's a systems issue. Here are our goals. We'll introduce systems. We'll look at a tool called the causal loop diagram. And then we'll apply this following the presentation. Systems thinking, as I said, this is not the Bowen's system theory, family systems. They're related, but they're not identical. This systems thinking was actually started by an engineer, Jay Forrester, in the 70s. He's kind of considered the father of systems thinking. And you may be more familiar with Peter Senge, who wrote Peter Senge work, like the Fifth Discipline and Fifth Discipline Handbook and all those things. So if you're reading Senge, you're reading systems thinking. Now, excuse me here. This is the really clumsy part. I have to back out here to show you a video.
Well, the term systems thinking is really a mixed bag, and I use it very, very cautiously. First, both words are problematic, but the word system is the most problematic, because if you say the word system, the picture or image that pops up into most people's head is computer system. Like, you know, we need a systems expert here because our system's not working. The second most common association is management control system, as it's not my fault, it's the stupid system, right? So these are the two associations that come first to people, and neither of them is what we're trying to help people understand. So whenever I'm trying to help people understand what this word system means, I usually start off by saying, are you part of a family? Everybody is a part of a family. Have you ever been seen in a family people producing consequences in the family, how people act, how people feel, that aren't what anybody intends? Yep. How does that happen? Well, you know, then people can tell their stories and think about it, but that then grounds people in not the jargon, you know, system or systems thinking, but the reality that we live in webs of interdependence. A family is a fairly close-knit one. You can kind of see most all the key players. But still, even though we can identify maybe on a list of 10 or 15 names, here's all the key people in my immediate family, still the complexity of interactions amongst all those people is obviously such that consistently families produce outcomes that nobody wants, which is the other kind of, you might say, fundamental rationale for all of this. It's not to, quote, understand systems. That's an abstraction. It's to understand how it is that the problems that are the most vexing and difficult and intransigent that we all deal with come about. And obviously, to get a perspective on those problems that gives us some leverage and some insight as to what we might do differently.
So, if that sounds familiar, you're hearing that it's the big picture of what's happening in a system. In other words, it's the adaptive leadership idea of getting on the balcony to oversee what's going on in a system. Rather than being on the dance floor, you're up in the balcony looking at the whole system of what's happening over here and how those are related, how they're interdependent. Why, as Peter said, when the outcomes aren't what you're expecting, it's the system. If I can only tell you one thing, it's that. When the outcomes aren't what you're expecting, it's the system. And so we're going to address three things. What's a system? How can we see a system? And how can we change a system? So what makes a system? A system is a very unique thing. It's a very specific thing. And to be a system, it has to have all of these, okay? So it's complex, which means it has multiple pieces or components. It's interrelated. In other words, all of the parts of a system are necessary for it to be a system. If you take away one part, it's no longer a system. They're interdependent, meaning what happens to one component affects other components, other pieces. And it has a purpose. It has the purpose of producing the outcome that it's designed to produce. And it's normally, almost always, 99.99% of the time, part of a larger system. And then a system also attempts to maintain stability, which means under Bowen's theory, it pursues equilibrium, and that means it resists change. Okay? Very interesting implications there just at the very beginning. All of these are necessary for it to be a system. Let's give you an example. Peter Senge talked about a family. So how is a family a system? Well, it's a complex combination of people. There are numerous factors involved with each person. Each member is related to the others. They're interrelated and they're interdependent. They're all dependent on the other. And it has a purpose. It is part of a larger system. If you are trying to take notes of all these slides, don't do it. I'm going to be passing around a sign-up sheet, and I have a handout that I'm going to send you, which will make more sense after you've heard this. And I will also send you slides. So don't try to take all of the notes, okay? Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, one more video. This is my favorite. About cats in Borneo.
In the 1950s, the Dayak people of Borneo, an island in Southeast Asia, were suffering from an outbreak of malaria, so they called the World Health Organization for help. The World Health Organization had a ready-made solution, which was to spray copious amounts of DDT around the island. With the application of DDT, the mosquitoes that carried the malaria were knocked down, and so was the malaria. There were some interesting side effects, though. The first was that the roofs of people's houses began to collapse on their heads. Turns out the DDT not only killed off the malaria-carrying mosquitoes, but it also killed a species of parasitic wasp that had controlled a population of thatch-eating caterpillars. Thatch being what the roofs of the Dayak people's homes were made from. Without the wasps, the caterpillars multiplied and flourished and began munching their way through the villagers' roofs. That was just the beginning. The DDT affected a lot of the island's other insects, which were eaten by the resident population of small lizards called geckos. The biological half-life of DDT is around 8 years, so animals like geckos do not metabolize it very fast. It stays in their system for a long time. Over time, the geckos began to accumulate pretty high levels of DDT, and while they tolerated the DDT fairly well, the island's resident cats, which dined on the geckos, did not. The cats ate the geckos, and the DDT contained in the geckos killed the cats. With the cats gone, the island's population of rats came out to play. We all know what happens when rats multiply and flourish. Pretty soon the Dayak people were back on the phone to the World Health Organization, only this time it wasn't malaria that was the problem. It was the plague and the destruction of their grain stores, both of which were caused by the overpopulation of rats. This time, though, the World Health Organization didn't have a ready-made solution and had to invent one. What did they do? They decided to parachute live cats into Borneo. Operation Cat Drop occurred courtesy of the Royal Air Force and eventually stabilized the situation.
So let's just summarize here what they brought out to us. If you don't understand the interrelatedness of things, solutions often cause more problems. Have you ever bumped into that? Where the solution actually caused more problems than fixing anything? Especially in the church, we see that problem quite a bit. We try to apply a quick fix because, quite honestly, a lot of people's feelings and emotions are wrapped up in things, and we don't have a whole lot of patience for people who are unhappy. So we try to make people happy by applying a quick fix. 6 months later, we're paying the price for applying a quick fix. That's systems. That's systems. And the second principle is why. Simple questions often require complex and reflective thinking if good solutions are to be found. See, a quick fix, you haven't thought through what are the common solutions, or what are the common issues that we're going to face if we apply X to this problem. What could be the outcomes? What could be the implications? Systems thinking will help you think through that in advance so that you won't apply a quick fix that's going to cause you problems later. It also is a diagnostic tool that can help you find where is the problem. What was it that happened? So management or leadership by design is far better than by default. All right, so now we'll dive into the systems thinking basics. And I've got a handout for you. Thanks, guys. So what you're getting is a copy of this handout, and this is called the iceberg. I think every concept has an iceberg associated with it. Of course, it's that time of year, so icebergs are good. So I think I'm going to change mine to a snow cone. I don't know. Yeah, the snow cone. No, I don't know. How much of your snow cone is above the cup versus below? I don't know. Okay. So this iceberg, again, there's the little bit that's above the surface, but most of the iceberg resides below the surface. And in this iceberg, there are multiple levels. And you'll see that the top level, which is above the surface, is the level of events. The second level, which is below the surface, just below the surface, is patterns or trends. The system level below that is underlying structures. And then at the base, the very bottom of that iceberg, is mental models. And this uses the example of a cold as an event. And so let's just talk through that very quickly. So let's say that the presenting problem, the presenting issue is, I've got a cold. And if I dig a little bit deeper, I'll realize, well, I've been getting a lot more colds lately. And then I think a little more about that, and it's like, well, yeah, I've got a lot of stress at work. A lot of stress. I haven't been eating real healthily. And then I think a little bit more, and it's, I really do believe that, rest is for the lazy. And I do think that my work is my identity. All of those levels exist in our model, and those are just examples, but we're going to work through those levels. So from top to bottom, we go from events to patterns to structures to mental models. And when we say mental models, what we're talking about are those intangibles, beliefs, values, assumptions. Those are mental models, things that we just assume to be true, things that help us order our reality. Okay? Every person in your church has a mental model of what church is, and I would bet you that very, very, very few of them are the same. As a matter of fact, a lot of what happens in churches is a result of the mental models that the person has. So, we tell the story of an event. Your event might be, well, our church attendance is going down. That's your event. That's just the surface level. What's going on underneath that? What's the pattern? What's the structure? What are the mental models that apply to those things? This is the model we're going to use. So we're going to talk through this. And later this afternoon, when we're done with this, we're going to help you work through that very process with your issue. Counselors will be available in the back. The key is we want to find the patterns underneath, and then we want to see what the structure is, and we want to identify mental models.